The rain had just started, light enough that the asphalt in our driveway carried only a muted sheen when I stepped out. I had meant only to grab the diaper bag before we left for dinner at her sister's. My wife was still inside, strapping our son into his car seat, and she called through the door for me to check the trunk. I pressed the button, expecting the familiar blue canvas bag with the embroidered initials, the one stuffed with pacifiers, wipes, and the change of clothes she swore we always needed. The trunk lifted smoothly, hydraulics whispering in the damp air. But instead of the expected bundle of cartoon ducks and pastel trim, there sat a black nylon duffel. Its zippers were locked with a small brass clasp, the kind you buy at hardware stores, and the side bore a faint scuff of white paint. It was positioned too neatly, centered, as though placed with deliberation rather than dropped in hurried use. I remember holding the edge of the trunk lid, rain gathering in my sleeve, trying to process the fact that there was no trace of the bag we actually needed. I touched the duffel. It was heavier than the diaper bag by several measures, yielding slightly but holding a firm core. When I shifted it, something clinked, metallic, like the brief collision of glass or steel. My first impulse was to assume she had borrowed it, perhaps carrying something for work. Yet her office rarely required equipment. She handled scheduling at a private pediatric practice, nothing more. A second glance confirmed what the weight suggested. This was not for a baby. I eased it back into place before she could emerge from the house. A small paper tag hung from one zipper pull. It bore no name, only a 4-digit number handwritten in black marker. The handwriting was angular, not hers. My mind recorded the digits automatically, though I pretended not to. When she appeared moments later, hair damp, ushering our son into his seat, I closed the trunk without mention. The drive to her sister's was uneventful. She talked about the new formula brand, about sleep regressions, her voice steady. I responded where needed, though my focus kept slipping back to the numbers, the lock, the muffled weight of whatever lay inside. At the house, she retrieved only her purse from the front seat, leaving the trunk unopened. No one else knew the bag was there. Later that night, when she said she needed to finish charting notes at the office and left again close to 10, the image of the duffel reasserted itself with the same quiet insistence as the rain against our windows. I sat at the dining table, laptop closed, and reviewed in my head what I had seen. The missing diaper bag was one fact. The substitution of a locked duffel was another. The unclaimed number scrawled on the tag was the third. None fit the patterns of our life as I understood them. It was not yet evidence of anything, but it was enough to replace sleep with calculation. The next morning, I left early under the pretense of a work call. My actual detour was to the garage, where her car still sat from the night before. The duffel remained in the trunk. I slipped on nitrile gloves from my own toolbox, habit from years of handling equipment where prints mattered, and checked the clasp. It was a simple luggage lock, combination style, with 3 dials. No scratches suggested forced attempts, which meant it was either frequently opened by someone who knew the code, or it had remained sealed since placement. I didn't try to break it. Instead, I lifted the bag and placed it on a folded tarp to avoid contact with oil-stained concrete. Its weight was consistent, somewhere between 20 and 25 pounds. Pressing gently, I felt a hard rectangular form against one side, maybe a case or box, and a shifting of smaller cylindrical objects when tilted. I took note but restored it carefully before she would notice. The absence of our actual diaper bag still bothered me. I searched the house again later and confirmed it wasn't in the closet where we normally kept it. That evening, when she claimed another round of late charting, I asked lightly whether the practice had added more patients. She nodded quickly, eyes down, saying seasonal demand had increased. It was plausible, but I remembered her office didn't bill per patient. The scheduling software they used capped daily entries. An expansion would have triggered extra staff, not solitary late nights. I didn't challenge her, only observed. The number on the zipper tag, 4627, occupied me most. I entered it into a search engine the next day at my office, disguising it as a file check. A string of local storage unit listings appeared, one in particular on the highway near Glen Burnie, advertising 4-digit unit identifiers. Their online directory showed 4627 as active, monthly rental, paid electronically. The coincidence was sharp enough to warrant keeping the page in a hidden folder, Still, speculation required more than a match. I began watching her mileage. On Tuesday before dawn, I noted the odometer reading in her car, 68,214. When she returned late that night, the display read 68,242, 28 miles. Our house to her clinic and back was only 18. The remainder suggested a detour, roughly consistent with the location of the storage facility. I photographed both readings with a timestamp app. The photos joined a growing folder on my encrypted drive, filed by date. On Wednesday, I visited her office under the excuse of dropping off lunch. The receptionist, a woman named Clara, seemed surprised. "She just stepped out," Clara said. I asked if it was a patient emergency. She hesitated, then explained it had been happening often. Quick trips off-site with vague explanations. She assumed it was pharmacy-related, but no documentation supported that. Clara's uncertainty was itself a record. I returned to my car and wrote it down verbatim in a small notebook. That night, when my wife returned home, I asked how work had been. She recited a list of ordinary tasks, none involving departures. I nodded, gave no sign, and went back to tidying dishes. The conflict between her version and Clara's note was the first direct contradiction I had from another source. By Thursday, the duffel was no longer in the trunk. In its place was a child's blanket, folded neatly, as though it had been there all along. I recognized it. It belonged to our son, but I also recognized the timing. The bag had been moved, either used or relocated. I felt an odd sense of loss. I had been counting on its presence for further review. Its absence meant she was aware enough to rotate contents, though not necessarily aware I had noticed. I redirected my attention to financials. Our joint account showed routine grocery purchases, utilities, and her share of daycare fees. But her individual account, into which part of her salary was deposited, showed 3 recurring withdrawals, each $240, marked Metro Storage LLC. The timing aligned with the storage facility's billing cycle. I downloaded 3 months, statements, redacted my access logs, and printed a single copy for secure keeping. The obstacle came when I attempted to verify directly at the facility. Their clerk required a unit number and proof of rental. I offered neither, claiming I was considering a lease. She slid a glossy brochure across the counter but withheld any ledger information, citing privacy. I left with only exterior impressions: chain link perimeter, keypad entry, rows of corrugated doors. The coincidence with 4,627 grew sharper, though not confirmed. Back home, I tried a controlled question. I asked my wife if we still kept the old stroller in storage. She paused, too long for a simple no, then replied that she had donated it. When I pressed gently which place took it, she shifted to another subject entirely: our son's bedtime routine. It wasn't clumsy evasion, but it was deliberate. I logged the exchange that night, noting her phrasing. The following weekend, I staged a small test. I suggested we drive together in her car to visit my parents. As she loaded our son's things, I placed a discreet GPS tracker, purchased online, no subscription, logging only to my own phone, under the rear bumper. It would capture departures without her awareness. The first signal ping came Sunday night at 9:42 p.m., coordinates aligning with the Glen Burnie facility. The second came 2 days later, nearly identical. The pattern was no longer hypothetical. What remained unclear was the content of the duffel, the nature of her visits, and whether this pointed to financial misconduct, hidden assets, or something entirely outside ordinary categories. What was clear was that her late nights had less to do with the pediatric practice than with a locked unit miles away. Each note, each receipt, each photo edged me closer, though none yet formed a complete explanation. For that, I would have to get closer still. The second week of monitoring deepened the pattern. Each late departure coincided with the tracker registering coordinates in the same perimeter. But raw coordinates were still circumstantial. I needed direct access. On Wednesday, I took a day of leave under the pretense of a departmental training and drove to the facility mid-morning, a time she never used. The rows of units looked indistinguishable: corrugated steel, padlocks, paint-weathered. I walked casually past, clipboard in hand to mimic inventory work, noting unit 4,627 midway down the second lane. Its lock was identical to the clasp I had seen on the duffel, a brass-bodied combination type. The tag on the hasp bore faint marker strokes, numbers half erased from friction but still legible. My certainty hardened. The obstacle emerged when I tried to learn more. A surveillance camera above the gate swiveled visibly, following vehicles and pedestrians. I recognized the brand Honeywell models with cloud storage. Access logs, too, were digital, tied to renter PIN entries at the keypad. Any attempt to force the lock or linger would not only trigger suspicion but leave my own image on their server. I stood no chance of opening it without exposure. I returned to my car with only one fresh detail: a receipt on the ground near the lane, damp from morning dew. It was crumpled, but the header read, Metro Storage LLC. The printed date was 2 days prior, the last time her tracker pinged. The amount was $40, annotated as overlock removal fee, that suggested her unit had been in arrears briefly, padlocked by management, then cleared after payment. The coincidence of timing was too strong to ignore. I photographed the receipt, replaced it where I found it, and added a note to my file: evidence of financial irregularity. That night I made a mistake. I asked her too directly if she had been behind on any bills. She frowned, said no, and asked why. I claimed the electric company had sent a late notice by mistake. She accepted the explanation, but her posture stiffened, arms crossing. For the first time, I sensed she suspected my line of thought. The risk of exposure to my own inquiry became real. To cover, I shifted tactics. Instead of questions, I watched. On Friday, when she claimed she needed to finish intake reports, I followed at distance in my own car. The tracker confirmed her stop at Glen Burnie. I parked 3 rows back in a discount store lot across the highway. Through binoculars, I saw her vehicle pass the keypad and roll into the rows. The gate closed behind her. 15 minutes later, she emerged, empty-handed. Whatever she had carried in or out was contained within the vehicle, shielded from my view. The complication wasn't just the surveillance, but her growing alertness. At home, she began keeping her purse close, sometimes even bringing her work laptop into the bedroom rather than leaving it in the office downstairs. Once I noticed the browser history wiped clean on our shared tablet. These were subtle adjustments, but they indicated she was tightening her perimeter. The next blow came from the tracker itself. On Sunday night, the device stopped sending signals. At first, I assumed low battery, but when I checked, I found the unit detached and discarded under a hedge near our driveway. She had discovered it. Whether by routine cleaning of the car or sheer chance, the result was the same. My monitoring was compromised. Replacing it immediately would confirm suspicion. For the first time, I was forced to pause. Still, the evidence already collected held weight. Odometer logs, account withdrawals, the storage receipt, the contradiction in her work schedules, all pointed consistently outward from the story she gave. But without direct proof of the duffel's contents, the narrative remained incomplete. I adjusted my focus to her email, accessed through the family desktop where she sometimes logged in without clearing cache. Late Monday, when she had gone upstairs, I found remnants of a session. A draft folder, empty now, but with a sync timestamp from the same hour she claimed to be in a meeting. In the system logs, one address lingered in autofill, cooperative.supply.llc@, followed by a generic domain. A search brought up little beyond a filing for a limited liability company registered in Delaware, no officers listed. The link to her was unproven, yet the appearance in her mail client suggested correspondence. I recorded a screenshot before the session expired. The obstacles compounded: technical limits, heightened suspicion, and now digital traces pointing to opaque entities outside our immediate circle. Each path forward risked alerting her. Each artifact hinted at layers I hadn't yet accounted for. I went to bed with the thought that surveillance had reached its ceiling. The next step would require a shift from passive collection to active strategy, and the timing would matter as much as the evidence itself. I spent the following days in restraint. With the tracker compromised and her vigilance heightened, pressing harder would only close the gaps further. Instead, I began laying out the evidence in structured order, like a case file. I created a table on my encrypted drive: dates, odometer readings, tracker coordinates, bank withdrawals, verbal contradictions. Seeing the columns align gave me something steadier than the scattered fragments in my head. The account withdrawals were the most reliable entry point. 3 recurring $240 payments had already surfaced. I reviewed the next cycle, due mid-month. When it posted, the description line read, AutoPay, Metro Storage LLC. That automated flag suggested she wasn't actively managing the payment. It was set to pull directly, meaning the rental was intentional, ongoing, not incidental. I printed the statement with the timestamp and tucked it in a sealed envelope. My plan was to create a chain of custody for myself, should disclosure become necessary. I also requested my own credit report, anticipating she might have linked accounts or joint obligations that could explain hidden liabilities. Nothing new appeared under my name. That absence was telling. The storage and its contents, whatever they were isolated under hers alone. Parallel to this, I explored indirect witnesses. Clara at the pediatric office remained a potential source. I returned one afternoon with a small gift basket for the staff, plausible enough for goodwill. In conversation, I asked lightly if my wife was still carrying so much of the workload alone. Clara replied that, in fact, she had noticed her stepping out more frequently, sometimes during peak clinic hours. She says she's running pharmacy errands, Clara said, lowering her voice, but we already get deliveries twice a week. It doesn't really add up. I thanked her, left the basket, and in the car transcribed her exact words. At home, I avoided confrontation, instead allowing my wife's schedule to play itself out. The duffel never reappeared in the trunk, but I noticed subtle substitutions. Blankets, an umbrella, a tote bag with grocery logos, rotated in ways too deliberate to be random. The trunk had become a stage, its props swapped according to what she wished me to see. My next angle was through vehicle data. Many late-model cars now stored trip logs accessible through service ports. On Saturday, while she visited her sister, I accessed the diagnostic port with a simple reader I had purchased online. The log showed destination coordinates cached by the navigation system. Several recent entries pointed not to the pediatric office but to a commercial address in Glen Burnie. The coordinates matched the storage facility within 50 yards. I saved the data export with time and date stamps. The strategy forming was less about catching her in the act than about compiling a record strong enough to withstand denial. If questioned directly, she could dismiss suspicions as paranoia. If presented with aligned artifacts, receipts, logs, contradictory witness statements, the weight would be more difficult to ignore. My plan was to assemble quietly, then decide whether disclosure belonged first to her, to a mediator, or, if necessary, to counsel. The primary obstacle remained access. Without seeing the contents of Unit 4627, my narrative risked collapse under alternative explanations. But legal access required either her consent or subpoena. I considered whether to consult an attorney preemptively, framing it as asset protection in the event of separation. The thought felt premature, yet strategically sound. For now, I made an appointment under the guise of estate planning, giving me cover to discuss contingencies without triggering alarms. Meanwhile, I set small tests. One evening, as she prepared to leave, I asked if she wanted me to ride along and keep her company. She hesitated, then smiled tightly and said it would be boring paperwork. I countered lightly that paperwork was my profession too. She laughed, changed the subject, and left alone. The test confirmed what I already knew. My presence was incompatible with her routine. On the evening of my legal consultation, I carried with me the sealed envelope of evidence. The attorney, a measured man in his 50s, listened as I presented the pattern in abstract terms, without names, without accusations. He explained calmly that in Maryland, property in storage could constitute marital asset if acquired during marriage, but access without the renter's permission risked trespass. His advice was to continue documenting, not to breach. If it becomes material, he said, there are lawful ways to compel disclosure. His words reinforced my strategy: patience, documentation, control. Leaving his office, I felt steadier. The course was not to chase, but to let her own actions accumulate into their record. Each payment, each mileage inconsistency, each erased browser session became another entry. My role was to remain the custodian of facts until the sum of them forced clarity. Yet clarity remained distant. On Friday, she came home earlier than usual, carrying our son's blanket over her arm, smiling as though nothing weighed behind it. We ate dinner quietly, exchanged updates on routine matters, and prepared for bed. I lay awake long after she slept, rehearsing in my mind the next phase. How to bridge from private record to confrontation without burning the very evidence I had worked to preserve. The turning point came sooner than I had planned. On a Tuesday evening, she arrived home earlier than expected, the faint smell of damp concrete clinging to her clothes. She set her purse on the counter and asked about our son's day with an ease that did not match the fatigue in her eyes. I answered plainly, then asked if she could sit a moment before dinner. She hesitated, sensing a weight in my voice, then joined me at the table. I placed the sealed envelope between us. I did not open it immediately, only rested my hand on it. "There are things I need to understand," I said carefully. "I've noticed patterns, mileage, accounts, late hours. They don't match what you've told me." Her eyes fixed on the envelope. For a moment, I thought she would deny everything outright. Instead, she asked, "What is that?" "Records," I said. "Odometer photos, bank withdrawals, receipts. I've kept a log. I need you to explain what connects them." The silence stretched. Then she reached for the envelope, but stopped short of touching it. "You've been tracking me?" she asked. Her tone was flat, not shocked, more like confirming a suspicion. "I've been documenting," I corrected. "Because what I found in your trunk wasn't a diaper bag. It was a duffel. Locked. Marked with a number. And the same number exists at a storage facility you visit at night." Her hand drew back. For the first time since this began, she closed her eyes as though calculating. When she opened them, she said, "You shouldn't have looked." "That's not an answer," I replied. "What's in the unit?" She didn't respond directly. Instead, she asked where our son was. I told her he was playing in his room. She nodded slowly, then whispered, "It isn't what you think. It's not another person." In a face I held steady. "Then tell me what it is." At last, she spoke, haltingly. She said the storage unit contained supplies from her brother's failed business, inventory he had left behind before leaving the state, equipment bought on credit, unaccounted for in bankruptcy filings. She claimed she had agreed to hold it until creditors stopped pursuing him. "If they find it, they'll say he hid assets," she said. I thought if I kept it quiet long enough, it would just expire. Her explanation carried plausibility, but not certainty. I asked why the payments came from her account, not his. She said he wired her cash irregularly, off the record, and she used her card to maintain continuity. I asked about the duffel. She admitted it contained smaller tools and documents, manuals, receipts, kept separate in case he returned. "I didn't want to bring them into the house," she added. The story fits some of the evidence, but not all. I pressed gently about the overlock fee receipt I had photographed. She conceded he had missed a transfer, forcing her to cover the shortfall. Her voice was calm, but her fingers tapped the table in small, rapid beats. The confrontation ended without shouting, but the room was weighted by what was unspoken. I told her plainly that concealment, whatever the motive, placed us at risk, financially, legally, personally. She said she understood, but begged me not to escalate. "It's almost done," she said. "Just let me finish it out." I didn't agree, but I didn't argue further. Instead, I returned the envelope to its drawer. The facts remained. Her words would join them. That night we lay in the same bed, each turned outward, the silence filled with things neither of us trusted enough to speak. The next morning, while she showered, I checked her purse on the counter. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, a printed invoice from Cooperative Supply LLC dated the previous month, listing equipment lots with serial numbers. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Unit 4627. Do not discard. The handwriting was not hers. I photographed it before returning it exactly as found. The confrontation had yielded a narrative, but the invoice revealed that another party's hand remained active in her secret. Whatever her brother's role, she was not the only link. And if the equipment had serials traceable to creditors, her concealment was no longer a private matter, but a potential liability to both of us. That realization hardened my path. Confrontation alone had not closed the gap. The next step would be to verify independently, with or without her cooperation. My strategy shifted from household dialogue to formal confirmation, a step I knew would change everything. 2 days after the invoice surfaced, I scheduled another appointment with the attorney. This time I brought the photograph of the note, the bank statements, and the odometer logs. He studied them in silence, then said, "You've reached the limit of what you can gather privately. If these are concealed assets from a bankruptcy, it exposes you too. The cleanest course is to document formally, place it on record that you knew and acted responsibly." I asked what that meant in practice. He suggested filing a protective statement, a kind of affidavit, noting my awareness of the unit but not its contents, accompanied by the evidence I had already compiled. That way, if a creditor inquiry arose, I could show I had not been complicit. It was not an aggressive step against my wife, but it established a line. I agreed, signed the draft he prepared, and carried a copy home in a sealed folder. That night, after our son was asleep, I told her what I had done. Her reaction was subdued, not angry. She stared at the kitchen counter, then said quietly, "So now it's official." I told her it had to be. "You've put us at risk," I said. "This way, at least one of us is shielded." She didn't argue. The following week, she admitted she had arranged to clear the unit. Her brother had resurfaced by email, instructing her to dispose of the inventory before collection notices caught up. She insisted the items were low value, obsolete equipment, tools, spare parts, medical carts, nothing worth reclaiming. But the invoice I had photographed told a different story. Several items carried identifiable serials. I suspected creditors could still trace them. She asked me to come with her. I agreed, but only to see for myself. At the facility, she entered her code and we walked the narrow lane to Unit 4627. The padlock opened under her hand. Inside, stacked against corrugated walls, were boxes labeled in shipping tape, a pair of wheeled carts, and 2 black duffels like the one I had first seen. The air was musty, thick with dust. She gestured as though to prove it was ordinary, not sinister. I took photographs of the contents without touching anything. The invoices matched the equipment before us. It was not contraband, not dangerous, but it was hidden property belonging on someone's ledger. She admitted she had kept it out of fear for her brother, believing she was helping him escape consequences. She hadn't told me because she knew I would object, and she was right. We loaded 1 box into her car, the rest she said she would arrange to discard. Driving home, she asked if I believed her. I told her belief was no longer the issue. The record existed, and my priority was keeping us clean. She nodded, eyes fixed on the road, as though accepting the distance that had opened between us. Weeks later, the unit was empty. I confirmed myself one evening, the padlock gone, the door raised to reveal only bare concrete. The bank withdrawals ceased. In the quiet that followed, we resumed a rhythm of ordinary days, daycare, dinners, work schedules, but something in our conversations remained procedural, less fluid than before. She no longer offered elaborate explanations. I no longer asked questions without noting the answers. Looking back, the motif that stayed with me was the number 4627, etched first on a zipper tag, then on an invoice, then on the corrugated door of a rented space that held more weight in silence than in substance. It had been a code not just for storage but for distance, a measure of what one person can hold back from another under the pretext of protection. The quiet moral insight I carried was less about deception than about omission, the way a withheld truth, even dressed as duty, corrodes the ground it rests on. My file of evidence remains locked in a drawer, sealed, unneeded for now, but never discarded. Some part of me believes it should stay there, not as leverage, but as reminder. Life returned to its surface normal. Yet whenever I fasten the trunk of her car, I still feel the reflex to check what lies inside. It is a habit now, as much as it is a memory, and perhaps it always will be.